August 19, 1941, 14:10 hours, south of Leningrad. A swampy crossroads near the village of Krasnogvardeysk. Senior Lieutenant Zinoviy Kolobanov crouches inside the cramped turret of his KV-1, engine rumbling beneath him like a caged animal. Through his periscope, he sees dust rising on the horizon, dozens of German armored vehicles advancing, PZ-3rd, PZ-4 armored cars, an entire battalion, 20-plus tanks supported by infantry and recon elements. They are moving fast, confident, unaware of what waits for them 800 meters ahead. Kolobanov's KV-1 is positioned hull down behind a sand embankment, concealed between birch trees and marsh tall grass. His tank is immobile, engine off to avoid detection. Ammunition racks are full, 98 rounds of 76mm armor-piercing shells. His loader, Sergeant Usov, wipes sweat with a shaking hand. The crew can hear German engines growing louder, closer, clearer, unmistakable. The KV-1 is a monster by 1941 standards. 45 tons of steel, thick armor that no German tank gun can reliably penetrate from the front. But Kolobanov knows something the Germans don't. The KV-1 may be strong, but it's alone. Completely alone. Radio contact is shaky, reinforcements are hours away, and the German column approaching consists of 3 separate spearheads. If they pass this crossroads, they break into Leningrad's defensive perimeter. Inside his turret, Kolobanov counts them silently. 1, 3, 5, 9. Too many. He grips the elevation wheel, marks the lead tank through the sight. 2 more Panzer companies appear behind the first. The Germans aren't advancing, they are flooding the battlefield with armor. If even one slips past, the defensive line collapses. The probability of survival, near zero. The probability of stopping a battalion with a single tank, mathematically impossible. Usov whispers, "Comrade Lieutenant, there are too many." Kolobanov doesn't blink. Loader, armor piercing. Wait for my command. Through the periscope, he sees the German point tank roll perfectly into the kill zone he measured the night before, precisely 450 meters from his position, a textbook ambush triangle. Exactly where he predicted they would appear. He whispers, "Steady, steady." Another tank emerges behind the lead, another. 40 tons of German armor moving into a trap sprung by a single crew of 5. Kolobanov exhales. "Gunner, first tank, fire." The KV-1 recoils. The first German tank explodes in a fireball. The battle for Krasnogvardeysk has begun. By August 1941, the mathematics of survival for Soviet tankers are brutal. Operation Barbarossa has been underway for just 8 weeks. The Wehrmacht has destroyed or captured more than 10,000 Soviet tanks. Entire mechanized corps have ceased to exist. German armored divisions, supported by air superiority and experienced crews, average a kill ratio of 6-to-1. A Soviet KV-1 crew statistically survives fewer than 3 combat engagements. German records show that when Panzer battalions encounter isolated Soviet armor, the outcome is predictable: encirclement, concentrated fire, rapid destruction. Even the KV-1, the most heavily armored tank in the world at that moment, rarely lasts long when surrounded. Its weak points are known: rear engine deck, vision slits, turret ring. And the numbers at Krasnogvardeysk are catastrophic. The German 8th Panzer Division is driving toward Leningrad along 3 converging roads. Recon elements report minimal Soviet resistance. Morale is high. A battalion of 20-plus German tanks and armored cars is moving directly toward the crossroads. Kolobanov defends. Kolobanov has only 5 KV-1 tanks in his company. He has positioned them in separate ambush zones, each blocking a different road. His own KV-1 covers the largest axis of advance, alone with no infantry, no artillery, no anti-tank guns, no minefields. The Germans hold every advantage except one. They do not know they are walking into an ambush engineered with mathematical precision. Kolobanov spent the previous evening measuring firing angles with a compass, calculating engagement ranges, and ordering his crew to dig the KV-1 into the earth until only the turret remained visible, a perfect hull-down position. But even perfect positioning cannot solve the core problem. One KV-1 versus an entire armored battalion. If the Germans fan out, they will flank him. If they bring up anti-tank guns, his armor will eventually fail. If they simply overwhelm him with numbers, his crew will die where they sit. The statistical expectation is clear. A single Soviet tank should not survive. A single Soviet tank cannot stop a battalion. But Zinoviy Kolobanov does not care about expectations. He cares about the one fact that matters. This crossroads must not fall. To understand why one man could turn a hopeless stand into a mathematical impossibility, you have to understand who Zinoviy Kolobanov was before August 19, 1941. He was not a propaganda poster hero. He was not a factory-fresh officer produced by wartime crash courses. By the time the Germans crossed the Soviet border in June 1941, Kolobanov was already a professional tanker with years of experience. Born in 1913 in the village of Arafino, he joined the Red Army in the early 1930s and graduated from a tank school at a time when tanks were still experimental weapons. He fought in the Winter War against Finland in 1939 to 1940, where Soviet armor met minefields, anti-tank guns, and frozen forests that punished careless commanders. In that brutal, chaotic conflict, Kolobanov learned 3 lessons that would decide the battle at Krasnogvardeysk. First, never attack where the enemy expects you. Second, the battlefield belongs to the man who chooses the ground. Third, a tank is not just a weapon, it is a trap, if you know how to build it. In Finland, he saw Soviet tank crews thrown into frontal assaults against well-prepared positions, losing dozens of vehicles in minutes. He watched inexperienced officers waste armor by treating it as blunt force instead of precision tools. By the end of the campaign, Kolobanov had a reputation among his men: calm under fire, ruthless in preparation, obsessive about reconnaissance. When Barbarossa began on June 22, 1941, the Red Army was collapsing. Entire mechanized corps were annihilated in days. Kolobanov, now a senior lieutenant, was given command of a KV-1 tank platoon near Leningrad. His orders were simple and impossible at the same time. Hold the approaches to the city while higher command tried to reassemble a coherent defense line out of shattered units and retreating remnants. He studied maps the way other men studied prayers. Roads, marshes, villages, wood lines, gradients. He took his tanks out not to attack but to scout. Where does the ground rise by half a meter? Where does the road narrow between ditches? Where can a 45-ton tank disappear behind a sand embankment? He understood something few commanders on either side grasped in 1941. The KV-1's real weapon was not just its gun, it was time. Time bought by armor that could absorb hits. Time stolen from the enemy by surprise. Time stretched into minutes that decided campaigns. When his regiment commander ordered him to block the German advance toward Krasnogvardeysk, Kolobanov did not complain about being outnumbered. He did not ask for more tanks. He asked for one thing only: time to prepare the battlefield. He got one night, and he used every minute. On the evening of August 18, 1941, Kolobanov took a map, a compass, and his platoon of 5 KV-1 tanks and went hunting, not for Germans, but for terrain. He knew from captured documents and reconnaissance reports that the German 8th Panzer Division would push toward Leningrad along 3 main roads converging on Krasnogvardeysk. He divided his small force accordingly: 4 KV-1s to block the smaller approaches and his own tank to cover the main axis. Where he expected the bulk of enemy armor, he chose his position with the precision of a surveyor. The road he would defend ran straight through marshy ground, bordered by soft soil that would bog down vehicles leaving the road. A drainage ditch ran parallel to the roadway, beyond it patches of birch forest and low ridgelines. The perfect place for a heavy tank to disappear, Kolobanov ordered his crew and local infantry to dig. They did not dig a trench for men. They dug a trench for a 45-ton tank. Hour after hour, shovels bit into wet soil as they carved out an earthen socket deep enough to conceal the KV-1's hull. By midnight, only the turret and a small portion of the upper hull were visible from the road. The rest of the tank sat below ground level, protected by a thick sand embankment. Then he walked the road on foot. Pacing out distances by steps, he marked reference points. A lone tree at 400 meters, a bend at 600, a broken fence post at 800. Each would correspond to a specific sight setting, a pre-calculated range dialed into the gun before the first German tank ever appeared. He measured the angle at which the road curved, the point where the German column would be forced to bunch up to avoid marshland. He knew they would not expect an ambush here. They would be focused on forward movement, not flank threats. He ordered his driver to pivot the KV-1 into its final firing position. The gun was aligned not straight down the road, but slightly offset, aimed at the spot where he predicted the first tank in the column would appear in profile as it negotiated the bend. He checked ammunition, 98 rounds loaded, mostly armor-piercing. He briefed his crew with cold, mathematical clarity. "We will not waste shells," he said. "First, we kill the lead tank. Then the last. The column will be trapped on the road. After that, we destroy them one by one. You will fire only on my command. No heroics. No random bursts. Every shot must count." His loader, Usov, nodded, pale but determined. Outside, the August night settled over the marshes, crickets, distant artillery, the low murmur of engines from other Soviet positions preparing for battle. Inside the KV-1, 5 men waited in near darkness, surrounded by steel and explosives, listening for the first distant sound that would decide their fate. German engines on the move. The morning of August 19th began as so many days of 1941 did for Soviet troops, with uncertainty. Radio reports were fragmentary. Some units to the south had already been overrun. Artillery units were displacing. Infantry formations were digging in, moving back, or disappearing entirely. Somewhere beyond the forest walls, the steel tide was rolling toward Leningrad. Inside Kolobanov's KV-1, the world had shrunk to the periscope view. Dust plumes appeared first. Faint brown smears above the tree line. Then the sound reached them. A low-growing rumble of multiple engines. Closer. Closer. The driver clenched the steering levers with sweaty hands. The loader shifted his weight, feeling the shells stacked beside him like a silent promise. Kolobanov watched the first German reconnaissance vehicles appear on the road. Light armored cars probing forward, cautious, scanning the flanks. They rolled past his hidden position, unaware. He let them go. They were not the real threat. The battalion behind them was. Minutes later, the main column arrived, panzers, dozens of them. A long metallic serpent moving through the landscape, turret hatches open. Commanders standing half exposed in the warm air, scanning ahead with field glasses, confidence in posture, routine in movement. They had done this many times before. None of them imagined that today the road itself had turned into a weapon. Kolobanov waited until the lead tank reached the first invisible mark he had measured the night before. The 450-meter point where the road forced it to slow slightly as it approached the gentle curve. He adjusted the sight. "Loader," he said quietly. "Armor piercing, first tank." "Loaded," Usov replied. "Gunner, lead vehicle, fire." The KV-1 76mm gun cracked like thunder inside the enclosed turret. The recoil slammed through the vehicle. The shell struck the lead panzer in its side armor. The result was immediate and catastrophic. The lead tank burst into flame, its tracks blown apart, turret canted at an unnatural angle. The column ground to a halt as vehicles behind it braked and swerved, drivers confused, commanders shouting over radios that flickered with sudden panic. Before they could react properly, Kolobanov issued his next command. "Last tank in the column, 800 meters. Fire." The second shot roared. The shell hit the rear vehicle, exploding its engine compartment. The last Panzer in the formation lurched, burned, and came to a dead stop, blocking the road behind the column. In the space of less than 20 seconds, Kolobanov had done exactly what he promised his crew. He had turned a moving armored column into a trapped convoy, boxed in between two burning wrecks, unable to maneuver off the road without sinking into marshland. Inside the KV-1, nobody cheered. They knew what would happen next. When a battalion realizes it is trapped, it does only one thing: it fights back with everything it has. For a few heartbeats after the second kill, there was only shock. Then the road erupted. German tank commanders ducked into their turrets, hatches slamming shut, radios crackled with overlapping orders. Engines revved as drivers tried to reverse, pivot, push past the burning wrecks. Some tanks turned their hulls toward the suspected direction of fire, while others fired blindly into the trees and embankments. To the Germans, it felt like an invisible fortress had opened fire. To Kolobanov, it was mathematics. Second from the front, 480 meters. Slight left fire. The third shell punched through another Panzer, turning it into twisted metal. Smoke began to spread across the road, obscuring visibility, creating a chaotic, flickering battlefield of shadows and flame. German gunners finally found something to shoot at. The embankment in front of the KV-1 exploded in fountains of earth as 37mm and 50mm cannon shells slammed into it. Armor-piercing rounds screamed in, throwing dirt and sand across the Soviet tank. Some clanged off the KV-1's thick armor with the metallic hammer blow of impacts that would have killed any lighter vehicle. Inside, the crew felt each hit as a physical punch. "Driver, do not move," Kolobanov ordered. "They must not see us shift position. Gunner, keep firing according to target order." He knew the Germans still did not have a precise fix on his location. The embankment and hull-down position hid most of his vehicle. The flashes of his gun were mostly masked. If he started moving, he would reveal himself. The KV-1 stayed rooted like a steel bunker. Shell after shell slammed into the embankment and bounced off the tank's armor. 37mm rounds broke apart against the 75mm front plate. Some hit the turret and left only scars. One round jammed a vision slit. Another ricocheted, showering the turret with fragments of stone and metal. "Loader faster," Kolobanov said calmly. "We are not shooting at tanks, we are shooting at time." Usov slammed another shell into the breach. The gun fired again. A fourth tank exploded, then a fifth. German crews tried to deploy anti-tank guns from their support vehicles, manhandling them into ditches and field edges, but the KV-1 hunted them with the same cold precision. A gun crew that paused a second too long under the smoke plume vanished in an eruption of steel and bodies as a 76mm shell found them. In less than 15 minutes of firing, the battlefield transformed. What had entered as an organized column was now a graveyard of shattered hulls, burning fuel and broken tracks. Some Panzers, crippled but not destroyed, were stuck at awkward angles, blocking any attempt to maneuver. Inside the KV-1, the crew's world had narrowed to a brutal rhythm. Load fire, impact, hit, dust, smoke, repeat. Behind every target, Kolobanov imagined not a tank, but a minute of time stolen from the German advance toward Leningrad. He was not simply destroying machines. He was buying a city another day to breathe. As the battle dragged on, the Germans adapted. They could not see the KV-1 clearly, but they could narrow down its approximate position. Repeated muzzle flashes revealed a section of embankment that had become the origin point of their losses. A new sound entered the battlefield, the sharper, heavier report of German anti-tank guns being deployed in earnest. These were not the light 37mm door knockers that bounced harmlessly off KV-1 armor. Some were 50mm guns. Others were the feared 75mm pack guns, capable, at close range and with a lucky shot, of hurting even a heavy Soviet tank shell impacts became more violent. One round slammed into the KV-1's turret ring, jarring the entire crew. Another struck the driver's vision port, cracking the glass. A third exploded against the gun mantlet, showering the interior with a rain of microscopic fragments that stung exposed skin. For the first time, the crew felt not just impact, but vulnerability. The radio crackled with fragmentary reports from other KV-1s in the company. They too were engaged, holding back other German spearheads. There would be no help, no flanking force to relieve pressure, no artillery strike to silence the guns. Every decision now rested on what Kolobanov chose to do in the next minutes. He could order a short reverse, back off the embankment, change his position slightly. It might confuse German gunners for a while. It might also expose weaker parts of the tank to fire. He chose a third option, fight even harder. "Driver, stay put," he ordered. "We will not give them a moving target." He shifted tactics. Until now, he had been systematically destroying tanks to block the road. Now he began to prioritize the most dangerous threats, the anti-tank guns. Through his sight, he scanned for flashes that did not move. Tiny signature bursts in the smoke line. Gun at 11 o'clock. 700 meters. Fire. A shot. A plume of earth. A gun shield flipped backward like a toy. Another flash. Another gun. Another shell. Another silence where a threat had been seconds before. Inside the KV-1, the air was choking with fumes. Sweat ran into eyes, ears rang with constant concussion. The floor was slick with oil and dust, empty shell casings piled at the loaders' feet, clinking metallically with every movement they had already fired dozens of rounds. Ammunition was no longer an abstract number, it was a finite resource rushing toward zero. "Comrade Lieutenant," Usov finally shouted between reloads, voice raw. "We're down to our last shells." "How many?" 15. Maybe less. 15 shells against whatever remained of a battered, but still dangerous German battalion. Kolobanov made his choice in a heartbeat. "Then every remaining shell will count twice," he said. He did not mean mathematically. He meant morally. Every additional German tank destroyed while his own crew remained alive was a message. You will not pass here. Not today. The KV-1's gun roared again and again until there were no full racks left to pull from. The crew worked mechanically now, muscles running on exhausted instinct. The loaders' hands were raw, fingerprints worn smooth by steel and brass. The gunner's eyes burned from smoke and unblinking focus. The driver's legs trembled from holding the vehicle rock steady under constant impact. Outside, the battlefield had changed from chaos to something worse. Stillness broken by isolated sounds. Burning fuel hissed and crackled, ammunition cooked off in shattered German tanks, detonating in random bursts. Black smoke columns rose into the sky, marking the road like funeral pillars. By the time the KV-1's last shells were fired, the numbers were almost unbelievable. According to Soviet combat reports, Kolobanov's crew destroyed 22 German tanks in this single engagement, plus armored cars and guns. Other estimates vary, but even German records concede catastrophic losses on that road on August 19, 1941. What the numbers cannot convey is the psychological transformation. At the beginning of the battle, the German tankers advanced with the habitual confidence of a force accustomed to winning. By the end, survivors were reversing blindly, abandoning vehicles, or simply sitting in cover, unwilling to expose themselves to the invisible predator behind the embankment. Then, finally, it ended. No more targets presented themselves. No more shots were fired. The road lay clogged with twisted steel and scorched rubber. Engines wheezed to a dying stop. Smoke formed a dark, greasy ceiling above the battlefield. Inside the K-1, the crew sat in shocked quiet. "Our ammunition is gone," Usov said, almost in disbelief. "Completely gone." For the first time in hours, Kolobanov allowed himself to lift his eye from the sight and simply look. The scene outside was not a victory parade. It was a graveyard that his small crew had created, shell by shell, decision by decision. He could have ordered withdrawal earlier. He could have conserved ammunition. He could have broken contact to save his crew from the growing storm of enemy fire. He did none of that. Instead, he had stayed until the mission was completed in the most literal sense. The road was blocked by wreckage so dense that no armored vehicle could pass without hours of recovery work under fire. The German timetable toward Leningrad had been broken by one tank. When they finally received the order to pull back, the KV-1 did something it had not done for the entire battle. It moved. The heavy tracks ground into the softened soil. The tank reversed out of its earthen socket like a steel beast emerging from a lair. German crews who still watched from the distance saw, for the first time, the shape of the monster that had butchered their column. 45 tons of armor, 5 men inside, and not a single crewman dead. In the days and weeks that followed the Krasnogvardeysk ambush, the story of Kolobanov's stand spread through Soviet units like an electrical charge. For frontline soldiers exhausted by retreat, the idea that a single KV-1 crew could halt and shred a German armored battalion felt like something between a miracle and a revenge fantasy made real. Commanders repeated the numbers in briefings. Political officers turned them into slogans. 1 tank, 22 destroyed enemy tanks. 0 losses in the crew. But beneath the myth, the hard data looked even more revealing. Analysis of the battlefield by Soviet staff officers showed that Kolobanov's platoon, not just his single tank, had inflicted massive disruptions on the German advance. His own KV-1 accounted for the largest share of destroyed armor, but the other 4 heavy tanks also claimed multiple kills on their respective roads. The impact went beyond casualties. German units were forced to halt, regroup, and rethink their assumptions about Soviet armor. Reports filed after the battle noted unusually skillful use of heavy tanks in ambush roles and unacceptable losses from a single hidden vehicle. In a war that often treated Soviet tank crews as expendable, Kolobanov's engagement became a rare example of what happened when training, terrain, and doctrine were used correctly. Still, recognition was uneven. Kolobanov was recommended for the highest Soviet award, the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Instead, he received the Order of the Red Banner. The official explanation has been debated ever since. Bureaucratic inertia, political rivalries, mistrust of officers who had served before the purges, or simply the chaos of early war record-keeping. The German side recorded the event differently. Their documents did not mention his name. They spoke of heavy Soviet tanks that caused serious losses at a road junction and delayed operations toward Leningrad. In those sterile phrases, there is no hint of how it felt inside a Panzer when the first vehicle in your column explodes, the last one follows, and your world collapses into fire with no visible enemy. For the 5 men inside the KV-1, the aftermath held no medal ceremony in the moment, no victory parade. There was only maintenance, resupply, and new orders. The war rolled on. Leningrad would soon be encircled and endure 872 days of siege. Kolobanov himself was wounded later in the war and eventually removed from frontline service. He survived the conflict, but his fame never matched the mathematical impossibility of what he had done in August 1941. In the archives, his combat report remains a dry document. Headings, timestamps, ranges, ammunition expenditure, claimed enemy losses. Between those lines lies something the report cannot fully express. How one man weaponized terrain, preparation, and courage to bend the curve of probability downward, if only for one day, on one road, for one threatened city. Every war story can be told in two ways. One way sounds like propaganda, a lone hero, a miraculous victory, a convenient myth that makes defeat elsewhere easier to swallow. The other way is harder, colder, and more useful. In that version, Zinoviy Kolobanov is not a myth. He is a case study. The Red Army in summer 1941 was, by most measures, losing its command structure, had been gutted. Its doctrine was confused. Its troops were retreating under catastrophic pressure. German armored divisions advanced with a kill ratio that made resistance look almost pointless. But at a swampy crossroads near Krasnogvardeysk, one officer refused to accept the standard script. He did not have more tanks. He did not have better radios. He did not have air support. What he had was time to think, the courage to disobey expectations, and the willingness to trust his own calculations more than the inertia of doctrine. He did not send his WW1s into glorious frontal attacks. He hid them. He did not fire wildly. He pre-measured ranges. He did not rely on hope. He relied on prepared ground, kill zones, and a simple sequence: stop the column, trap it, dismantle it. The numbers that came out of that choice are startling but not magical. 1 tank, 98 rounds, 22 destroyed enemy tanks, 1 critical road denied, 1 day bought for a besieged city. From the German perspective, the lesson was brutal. Underestimate an inferior enemy's equipment and commanders, and you can lose a battalion to a single hidden gun. From the Soviet perspective, the lesson was uncomfortable. When you allow experienced professionals to apply their craft, when you give them minimal time and freedom to prepare, the results can exceed what any headquarters order sheet predicts. For us, watching this story decades later, the question is not just how many tanks did he kill. The real question is, how did one person decide that the rules of the day, retreat, panic, rushed counterattacks, did not apply to him? How did one tank commander look at a losing equation and say, I can change this? Not everywhere, not for everyone, but here, on this road, today. Zinoviy Kolobanov did not win the war. He did not stop the siege of Leningrad. He did not become a universally known name in history books. But on August 19th, 1941, he did something just as important on a human scale. He proved that even in a war dominated by mass, industry, and ideology, the outcome on a given day can still hinge on 5 men in a steel box, a shovel in wet soil, and 1 officer who refuses to accept that the only possible outcome is defeat. If this story made you see the Eastern Front differently, remember this. Behind every neat statistic, 22 tanks destroyed, 1 battalion halted, there is always a single, uncomfortable, dangerous question. What could you do if you treated the impossible as a problem to be engineered instead of a sentence to be obeyed?